At my nephew's graduation, they thanked everyone, except me. I'd been paying his tuition for 3 years. My sister smirked. "You're just the ATM." I don't say anything. The next day, I got a call from the dean. "Sir, the school emailed me about the final balance before releasing his diploma. I canceled the payment." 3 days later, my nephew called me sobbing. "They won't give me my degree." I just said, "Guess you'll have to thank your ATM." I, 34M, sat in the third row of the auditorium, watching my nephew walk across that stage in his cap and gown, and I felt nothing but pride. 3 years of tuition payments, countless late-night calls helping him through panic attacks during finals, emergency funds when his laptop died, all of it had led to this moment. The kid had worked hard, really hard, and I was genuinely happy for him. Then came the speech. He stood at the podium, diploma in hand, and started thanking people. First his mom, my sister, for her unwavering support and sacrifice. Fair enough. Then his grandmother for believing in him. His high school guidance counselor who'd helped him apply. His roommate for keeping him sane. Even his ex-girlfriend who'd apparently motivated him to succeed after their breakup. The list went on and on. I sat there, waiting, my smile getting tighter with each name that wasn't mine. He never said it. My name never came up. After the ceremony, I made my way through the crowd of families taking photos. My sister spotted me first. She had that look on her face, the one she'd perfected over the years, smug satisfaction mixed with something darker. She sidled up next to me while my nephew was busy hugging his friends. She told me I looked tense, asking if something was wrong. I said nothing was wrong, just surprised I didn't get a mention in the speech considering I'd been funding his education for 3 years. The words came out more bitter than I'd intended, but I was past caring about appearances. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she leaned in close and told me I shouldn't take it personally. I was just the ATM. Those were her exact words. The money guy? Not family in the way that counted. Her son didn't need to thank a bank machine for doing what it was supposed to do. I stood there, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This woman was my sister. We'd grown up in the same house, shared the same parents, survived the same childhood. And she'd just reduced 3 years of my life, my money, my emotional investment, to a transaction at a cash machine. I didn't say anything. Not a word. I just nodded slowly, turned around, and walked out of that auditorium. I heard her call after me, something about not being so sensitive, but I kept walking. I got in my car and sat there for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. The thing is, I'd always been the family safety net. When my sister's husband left her 5 years ago, I was the one who helped with rent. When my mom needed surgery, I covered what insurance wouldn't. When my nephew got accepted into that prestigious university with minimal financial aid, I was the one who stepped up without hesitation. I'd never asked for gratitude, never thrown it in anyone's face. I just did it because that's what family does. But sitting in that parking lot, I realized something. To them, I wasn't family. I was a resource, a utility, something to be used when needed and forgotten when convenient. I drove home in silence, mind racing. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the speech, my sister's words, the casual cruelty of it all. By morning, I'd made a decision. If I was just an ATM, then I could shut down any time I wanted. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end identified himself as Dean Morrison from my nephew's university. My stomach dropped. He asked if I was the guarantor on my nephew's account, and I confirmed I was. He explained that the school had sent an email regarding the final balance before they could release my nephew's diploma. There was an outstanding payment of $8,000 for the last semester that hadn't cleared. I knew about that payment. It was scheduled to go through that week. I'd set it up months ago. The dean asked if there was a problem with the payment, if I needed to update my banking information. His tone was professional but concerned. This wasn't unusual for them. Students got held up over unpaid balances all the time. I told him there wasn't a problem with my banking information. Then I told him I was canceling the payment. There was a long pause on the other end. He asked if I was certain, explaining that without the payment, they couldn't release the diploma or the official transcripts. My nephew wouldn't be able to prove he'd graduated, wouldn't be able to start the job he'd lined up. I said I understood completely. Then I thanked him for calling and hung up. My hands were shaking. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. I don't enjoy hurting people. But something in me had broken in that auditorium, and I couldn't unfeel it. I couldn't unknow that I was just an ATM to them. I logged into my bank account and canceled the scheduled payment. $8,000 that would now stay in my account. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else do it. But I didn't stop. I also pulled up the spreadsheet I'd been keeping, because of course I kept records of every payment I'd made for my nephew over the past 3 years. Tuition, books, housing deposits, meal plans, emergency funds. The total came to $73,000. $73,000 for someone who couldn't spare 30 seconds to say thank you. 3 days passed. I went to work, came home, lived my life. Didn't call my sister. Didn't reach out to my nephew. Didn't explain myself. If they wanted to know why the payment didn't go through, they could figure it out. On the 3rd day, my nephew called. I saw his name on my screen and almost didn't answer. But curiosity won out. He was crying. Actually sobbing. The words came out in a panicked rush. The school wouldn't give him his degree. They said there was an unpaid balance. His job offer was contingent on proving graduation. He was going to lose everything. What was he supposed to do? I let him finish. Let him get it all out. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I told him I guessed he'd have to thank his ATM. The line went silent. I could hear his breathing, ragged and confused. He asked what I meant, his voice small now, like he already knew but didn't want to believe it. I explained slowly. I told him I'd been at his graduation. I'd heard his speech. Heard him thank everyone who'd helped him get there. I'd also had a conversation with his mother afterward where she'd made it very clear what my role was in the family. So I was simply fulfilling that role. ATMs don't require gratitude. They're just machines that dispense money. And machines can be turned off. He started stammering, saying he didn't know I'd be there, that he'd written the speech weeks ago, that he hadn't meant to leave me out. His mother had helped him with it, told him who to thank, and somehow I just didn't make the final cut. It wasn't personal. I asked him how it wasn't personal. How does someone forget the person who paid for their entire education? Who took their frantic calls at 2 in the morning during exam season? Who sent extra money for groceries when his meal plan ran out? He didn't have an answer. Just more crying, more apologies, more explanations that explained nothing. I told him I had to go. He begged me to reconsider, said he'd do anything, that he was sorry, that he'd fix this. I said there was nothing to fix. This was just me being what his mother said I was, an ATM. And ATMs don't have feelings to hurt or relationships to mend. Then I hung up. Update 1. The call started immediately after that. My nephew called 6 more times that day. I didn't answer. My sister called twice, left voicemails that I deleted without listening to. My mom called that evening, asking what was going on, saying my sister had told her there was some misunderstanding about my nephew's graduation payment. I told my mom there was no misunderstanding. I'd been called an ATM by my sister, treated like a nonentity by my nephew, and I was done. I'd paid for 3 years of education. The last payment was their responsibility now. My mom tried the guilt route, told me I was being petty, that I was ruining my nephew's future over hurt feelings that family was supposed to forgive. I asked her if she'd been at the graduation. She said no, her arthritis had been acting up. I told her that if she had been there, she would have heard a 10-minute speech thanking everyone except the person who made it all possible. Then she might understand why I wasn't feeling particularly forgiving. She went quiet. Then she asked how much the balance was. I told her $8,000. She said she didn't have that kind of money. I said I knew. Neither did my sister. That was why they'd relied on me for 3 years. My mom sighed and said she'd talk to my sister. I told her not to bother on my account. Then I said I loved her and ended the call. That night, my sister finally sent a text instead of calling. It was long, rambling, full of justifications. She said she'd been joking at the graduation, that I was taking everything too seriously. The ATM comment was just her being sarcastic. She hadn't meant anything by it. I was being oversensitive and punishing my nephew for her poor choice of words. I read it 3 times. Then I typed back a single sentence asking if she remembered what she'd said before the ATM comment. That I shouldn't expect thanks because I wasn't family in the way that counted. She didn't respond to that. Update 2. A week went by. My nephew had apparently tried to negotiate with the university, explaining his situation, asking for payment plans or extensions. They were sympathetic but firm. No payment, no diploma. His job offer was rescinded after he couldn't provide proof of graduation. He'd moved back home with my sister. I heard all this through my mom, who'd become the unwilling intermediary. She told me my nephew was devastated, spending all day sending out new job applications, trying to explain the situation to potential employers. My sister was furious with me, telling everyone in the family that I'd sabotaged her son's future over a petty grudge. The family had split into camps. Some agreed with me that I'd been disrespected and had every right to withdraw my support. Others thought I was being cruel, that punishing my nephew for my sister's words was wrong. Family dinners became tense affairs that I stopped attending. My mom asked me again if I'd reconsider. She wasn't guilt-tripping this time, just asking. She told me I had every right to be hurt, that what my sister said was inexcusable, but was I sure this was the outcome I wanted? I asked her what outcome she thought I should want. Should I just pay the money, pretend nothing happened, and go back to being the family ATM? Show everyone that they could treat me however they wanted as long as they needed something from me? She didn't have an answer for that. But her question bothered me. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I'd wanted acknowledgement, respect, basic human decency. Instead, I'd gotten dismissal and was now handing out consequences. Was I satisfied? Not really. Was I sorry? Also no. Then my nephew showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen him since the graduation. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing a wrinkled shirt. He asked if we could talk. I almost said no, but something in his face made me step aside and let him in. He sat on my couch and just started talking. Told me everything. How his mom had written most of his speech, insisting certain people needed to be thanked for political family reasons. How he'd suggested adding me, but she'd waved it off, saying I wouldn't care about public recognition. How he'd been uncomfortable with it, but trusted his mom's judgment. How he'd been so nervous about the speech itself that he hadn't really thought about who was or wasn't included. Then he told me about the aftermath. How his mom had laughed when I left, saying I'd get over it. How he hadn't understood what happened until I explained it on the phone. How he'd confronted his mom and she'd admitted what she'd said, but insisted she'd been joking. How he'd realized for the first time that his mom had been using me for years and he'd just gone along with it because it benefited him. He said he was sorry, not the panicked, desperate sorry from the phone call. A genuine, gutted sorry. He said he understood if I never forgave him, but he needed me to know that he'd been ignorant, not malicious. He'd taken my help for granted because his mom had normalized it. Made it seem like I was just doing what uncles do, not making massive sacrifices. I asked him why he was really here. He said because he needed to apologize face to face, regardless of what I decided about the money. Then he stood up to leave. I asked him what his plan was now. He said he'd found a job at a warehouse, decent pay, enough to start saving. His mom was pressuring him to get loans, pay the university balance, get his diploma. But he'd been thinking maybe he didn't deserve it. Maybe this was his consequence to live with. Something about that struck me. He wasn't here to manipulate me. Wasn't here with his mom's coaching. He was here because he'd finally understood what had happened and wanted to own it. I told him to sit down. Then I asked him a question. If I paid the balance and he got his diploma, what would change? Would he stand up to his mom? Would he recognize when he was being used or using someone? Would he be different? He thought about it for a long time. Then he said he didn't know, but he wanted to try. He said he'd pay me back every cent of the $8,000, even if it took years. He said he'd be better about communication, about gratitude, about not taking people for granted. I told him I'd think about it. He nodded and left. Update 3. I spent 2 weeks thinking. Really thinking, not just stewing in anger. I looked at my own motivations. Was I withholding the money to teach a lesson or to punish? Was I helping my nephew grow or just satisfying my own hurt ego? The truth was complicated. I was hurt. I didn't want them to understand consequences. But I also didn't want to be the person who destroyed my nephew's future to prove a point. That wasn't who I wanted to be. I called the university and paid the balance. Then I called my nephew and told him his diploma would be released. I heard him start to cry, start to thank me, but I cut him off. I told him this wasn't forgiveness. This was me choosing not to let his mother's cruelty turn me into someone cruel. But things were different now. I wasn't the family ATM anymore. If he wanted a relationship with me, it would be built on mutual respect, not financial dependency. He'd pay me back the $8,000 on whatever timeline worked for him. I didn't care if it took 10 years. But he'd pay it back because that was how adults handled their debts. As for my sister, I told him I was done with her. No more emergency funds, no more safety nets, no more anything. She'd made it clear how she saw me, and I was accepting that reality. He agreed to everything. Said it was fair. Said he understood. Then I called my mom and told her what I'd done. She cried. Said she was proud of me for being the bigger person. I told her I wasn't being the bigger person. I was just choosing my battles. My nephew was young and stupid, but not malicious. My sister was something else entirely. My mom asked if I'd ever forgive my sister. I said maybe someday, but not today. She'd have to want forgiveness first, and I didn't think she believed she'd done anything wrong. The last call I made was to my sister. I told her I'd paid my nephew's balance. Before she could thank me or gloat, I told her this was the last time. The bank of me was permanently closed to her. She started to argue, to defend herself, but I just talked over her. I told her she'd spent years treating me like a resource instead of a brother. That her ATM comment wasn't a joke, it was the truth slipping out. That I was done pretending we had a relationship built on anything other than my usefulness to her. If she ever needed something again, she'd have to figure it out herself. She called me selfish. Said I was abandoning family. I told her she'd abandoned me first. She'd just been subtle about it. Then I hung up. 2 months have passed now. My nephew sends me a payment every month, $150, which is what he can afford from his new job. He also texts occasionally, nothing heavy, just checking in, asking how I'm doing, telling me about his interviews, building something real instead of transactional. My sister hasn't contacted me at all. According to my mom, she's telling people I turned my back on the family. I've stopped caring what she tells people. As for me, I'm lighter somehow. That weight of being needed, of being the solution to everyone's problems, it's gone. I'm just me now. Not an ATM, not a safety net. Just a person who learned to value himself enough to walk away from people who didn't. And honestly, that feels better than any thank you speech ever could have.